I was going to open this with a rendition of Any Dream Will Do, as it's about Joseph of amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat fame, but I can't sing, so I'll do everyone a favour and not do that. We're looking at Genesis chapters 37 to 41, so this is the first part of the story of Joseph. Just as a little catch up in terms of who Joseph is, so we've had Adam and Eve, leads down to Noah, world then destroyed, Noah repopulates. That drops us down to Abraham. Abraham then drops down to Isaac, being his son. Jacob is the son of Isaac, and Jacob is the one who becomes Israel, and something to do later on with the Israelites. So hopefully now we're clear on where we're up to. Joseph is the first biblical superhero, I suppose. His superpower is not the coolest in the world. It's interpreting dreams. I think maybe flying or doing something with fire would have been cooler. But that is new in the sense we've got someone channeling some sort of special gift. Joseph does have not a darker side, but he's a little bit of a punk, and he's flaunting things in front of his brothers, and he's not particularly wise in how he speaks to them. Bear in mind he's one of the youngest, if not the youngest, certainly at the lower end. For instance, at one point he tells his brothers about a dream he has where basically it's a dream about them bowing down to him, and he seems to do this not in a spiteful way, but he's very unpopular with his brothers, so he's clearly cruising for a wedgie. The problem is his brothers are also the same brothers, well, two of them anyway, who went and massacred all the male Shechemites. I think I've got that right. So clearly slightly psychotic brothers, and instead of thinking, well, we'll give our little brother a wedgie for being a bit cheeky and a bit punk, they think, actually, no, we're going to kill him, then throw him in a pit. That's more of this sort of thing. In a shout out to his brother Reuben, he does at least try to do something to try and rescue him, but it's a little bit indirect and ineffective ultimately. Perhaps for fear that they were going to kill him as well, which doesn't seem unreasonable in the sense that that would be an expectation. Last minute sort of reprieve anyway, in that the brothers think, actually no, there's a much better idea. Instead of killing him and just throwing him in a hole, we can sell him and get some money for him. So is that maybe it's entrepreneurism in the Bible, where it's selling your brother into slavery? At this point we veer off into a tangent of this chapter 38, which is the story of Judah and his sons. Judah being one of Joseph's brothers. This is completely random and has nothing to do with the story of Joseph, or at least not obvious at this point anyway. Judah has 3 sons. The first one, he gets a wife for him, and before that son has children, it turns out that he's wicked, as it says in the Bible, so God puts him to death. Yeah. It literally just says, so God puts him to death. Don't know what that wickedness was. Maybe it was really, really bad. But yeah, God full on just struck him down and killed him. Judah, the brother, then goes to his next son, the second eldest son, and says, right, you've got to step up and take over from your brother. That seems to be some sort of cultural thing, so I'm just going to ignore that. The second son doesn't seem to want to do this, so he seems quite happy to sleep with his late brother's wife, but does it in such a way that she's not going to get pregnant, shall we say. And for doing this, God kills him too. So, yeah, it's a bit weird. Anyway, it gets worse because it turns out that Judah, being the father, he sleeps with her in the end anyway. Unknowingly so. It's sort of all right because he thought he was sleeping with a prostitute. She gets pregnant by him anyway. There was a long series of stuff that led to that. I'm sure there must be something in that I'm just skipping over and not doing justice to, but we can look at that another day perhaps. So she ends up pregnant. He's with her father-in-law and all seems to be fine there. And that's the story. So basically my takeaway from that is that God killed 2 people for not quite behaving as they were, one for being wicked and one for not wanting to get someone pregnant. Slightly problematic story, I think, in that respect. We'll come back to that anyway, because it now goes back to another bit of the story of Joseph. So Joseph's brothers have sold him as a slave. Those people who they sold him to then take him to Egypt and sell him as a slave, but to a prominent Egyptian, where it turns out that this guy kind of likes Joseph because Joseph sounds like he's very competent. It said that the Lord is with him and that the Egyptian chap can see that. It's not clear what that means exactly, and presumably it's completely different gods because the Egyptian gods were not the same as anybody else's, so we'll skip over that anyway. But anyway, so Joseph goes on to have a reasonably good life at this point. The problem is, it says at the beginning of the chapter that Joseph is well built and handsome, so he attracts the attention of the boss's wife. She keeps trying to entice him into bed. He's been very, very good. I mean, he seems like a pretty pure guy so far, apart from just being a little bit of a unwise punk in how he flaunts things to people. Turns down the boss's wife. No, I'm not going to do all that. And it seemed in some sort of fit of revenge, she then tells her husband that he was hitting on her and, oh, it's all terrible, get rid of him. So Joseph ends up in prison, and seemingly for quite some time, a couple of years or something. Whilst he's in prison, he demonstrates his power of reading dreams, which sometime later, a couple of years it seems, gets news to the Pharaoh. So the Pharaoh gets him out of prison to come and help interpret some of his own dreams that he's having. From where Joseph predicts 7 years, of course it's 7, of good harvest and all the rest of it, followed by 7 further years of famine. So the Pharaoh looks for someone to come and manage this and says, oh, well, actually, Joseph clearly is on the ball, so he can come and do it. So Joseph ends up at the end of this part of the story as the most powerful man in Egypt, basically, save for the Pharaoh. So it's gone kind of quite well if going through, having been in prison for a bit, having been thrown in a hole for a bit and sold as a slave, and it's an interesting, colourful life he's had, certainly. In terms of literal versus non-literal, I think this one's, there's nothing actually mystical at all, I guess, apart from translating dreams, but that's I'm predicting the future, I guess, as well, because that goes on, it does actually come to pass, as Joseph has said, so he clearly does have an actual superpower. But yeah, there's nothing outrageous about it, I suppose, so I'm sort of okay with the broad strokes again of this. That sort of takes the pressure a little bit off the moral of the story, I suppose, in the sense that if it's just narration, it won't necessarily have to have a moral. But it is interesting that Joseph is clearly a good guy and still suffers. He's still beaten up and thrown in a hole by his own family, sold into slavery, which luckily that sort of works out okay, but probably wasn't pleasant for a while there. Goes to prison for a couple of years, when I imagine a prison at that time wouldn't have been a lot of fun. So certainly interesting there, even where you're good and you find favour with God and you've got a big purpose, there are going to be periods whilst things are not so good. The problem part, I think, is just that Judah bit, this God getting involved in killing people. One wicked, I mean, he could have been the worst thing in the world, but short of being Adolf Hitler, who was allowed to not be killed by God, we wonder how bad he could have been, or at least on a scale. And then the other brother, who just didn't want to get his late brother's wife pregnant and gets killed for it. It's a bit extreme, I think. It's not clear what rule he's broken there or anything. It's not even God who told him to do it. It was his father Israel who told him to do it. So yeah. So we'll have to see what happens in the rest of the story and see if something a bit more positive emerges from that.